Thank you very much. I've been in North America now for about 5 days, come from the jungles of Colombia, South America. I live in the jungles, have lived there for 55 years. I started ministry among one tribal peoples, the Motilons, and now we're ministering in 18 different languages among almost 400,000 indigenous people isolated in jungle areas. The first tribe that I made contact, the Motilon tribe, which is the subject of the book that Rob mentions, were a very primitive Indian, a very primitive tribe, hostilities against the Western world. They had shot over hundreds of employees of the Texaco and Saucony Mobile oil companies. They had shot colonization who attempted to enter into their territories. The Colombian papers called them savages, even called them cannibals. We're not cannibals. Savage is not a bad name because it's a person who lives well in his or her environment. I was going to South America to contact the tribal people to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. I was 17 years old when I announced to my parents I'm leaving for South America. And my father, a prominent banker from St. Paul, Minnesota, he didn't like the idea that his son would waste his life. But I had permission from my parents eventually. And I left for South America with $72 in my pocket. The Colombian papers referred to the Motilon Indians as savage, primitive, bellicose, aggressive against the Western world. Everything that's evil would be enveloped in the Motilon name. Now, after 55 years, President of Colombia is entertaining two Motilons in Bogota before the Organization of American States. Delegates have come from all the North and South American countries, and they invited a Motilon, a graduated lawyer with 2 PhDs. There are over 50 doctors in the Motilon tribe. There are dentists. There are professional personnel. There are nurses. From this tribe that was considered savage and primitive and bellicose against the Western world, 2 of them will come to the Organization of American States, invited by the President of our country. A tremendous change came among the Motilon people. And we're talking about community development at the OAS. And when the Motilon delegation arrives, all the delegates are intent, thinking they're going to see people dressed in loincloths or seeing something very exotic. Arabadoica is the chieftain. He will speak for his people. Roberto Daxarara, the double PhD, will be his translator. The president looks at Arabadoica and said, something has changed your people in the 21st century, development. And this is what we want to bring to all our rural areas. How have you attained such a high standard in education among your people? You have produced doctors where you were savage. You have produced dentists where you had epidemics decimating your populations. And Arabadoica said, it's because we walk in the footsteps of a new leader. So the president turns around and looks at Bruce Olsen. This must be your leader. You must be walking in his footsteps. And Arabadoica says, no, we don't emulate or copy Olsen. We taught him how to speak our language. We taught him how to eat the palm grubs to sustain his life. So the president then thinks it must be preventative medical procedures. It must be education. It must be tropical agriculture that has changed your people, that has brought you into the dynamics of the 21st century. And Arabadoica is frustrated, and he looks at the president into his eyes, and he says, we walk in the footsteps of a new leader, not Bruce Olsen, not science and education. The leader's the first person to walk on the trail. You walk in the footsteps of the leader, you're recognizing this person's authority in your life. Well, who is this new leader in whose footsteps you walk? And Arabadoica said, Jesus Christ. How does a tribal people who is considered savage walk into the 21st century and lecture Colombia as to the importance of Christ in their life? I did not go to the Motilon Indians to change the culture or to pacify them. I'm not calling the Motilon savage, and I'm not degrading them because I love them, I live with them, I speak their language more fluent than English. I've come to the Motilons to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. I first made contact with the Yukpa Indians who live north of the Motilon territory in the high echelons of the Andes Mountains. And traveling with the Yukpas, we came to the low territories, the valleys in which the Motilons live, in this territory called Catatumbo, which means lightning. It's curious. Spaniards believed that when lightning would strike the rocks of the jungle floor, it would convert the rocks into gold. So Alonso de Ojeda, 460 years ago, penetrated the Catatumbo, parts of the Colombian jungles, looking for this gold, the El Dorado, and he was sniped at by the Motilon Indians, and his commission was destroyed. Now, 480 years later, a Scandinavian from Minnesota is following with a Yukpa leader to come into Motilon territory in anticipant of a contact with a tribe of Indians whom we have not known. When you walk through the jungles, you hear the parrots overhead. They follow along behind you, and the monkeys as well. The monkeys look at me and laugh because I lose my balance. And I think the monkeys are critical. If I would have a tail, I wouldn't fall on the trail. Pretty soon the trail bleeds out and you're in jungles and you're crawling around the obstacles, through the obstacles. What do you eat when you walk through the jungles? You just drink a lot of water to fill your stomach. There are some wild roots, and in my diet it causes diarrhea. We have exotic palm grubs and other exotic insects which are edible. In about the sixth day, the monkeys were no longer following behind us, and the parrots had become silent. And the Yukpas perceived danger. Several hours later, we were ambushed by the Motilons. They have 4.5-foot long arrows, and they shot at us. The Yukpas were frightened and dropped their bows and arrows and ran. Motilons are fine marksmen, greater warriors than the Yukpas. Who were my guides? The Yukpas? So I ran behind them, but I couldn't catch up with them. They can slip through the jungles with the agility of a deer, and I got tangled into a vine. And as I fell to the jungle floor, a 4.5-foot long arrow slashed through my leg. The Yukpas were gone. I listened intently as the Motilons walked over the dry jungle leaves, and the weight of their feet breaking the twigs on the jungle floor, they were approaching me. And I looked up and I saw 7 warriors with their bows and arrows drawn taut, pointing at me. I prayed to God for a miracle. First, I must say my father is right. If you go to South America, it's dangerous. I shouldn't have gone. But I'm there. I pray for a miracle. I ask God for thunder and lightning to frighten the Indians. Nothing happened. I asked God to send a bright light like lightning to frighten the Indians away from me so I could escape. Yeah, how are you going to run away with a 4.5-foot long arrow slashed through your thigh? Then I asked God for the greatest miracle of all. Send an earthquake. This is common in South America. Shake the earth, I'll get away from these people. And the warriors approached me closer. Then a miracle happened. It was greater than thunder, it was greater than lightning, and it was greater than an earthquake. Can you imagine what that might have been? God put peace in my heart that I was at the right place at the right time. The presence of Jesus is with us in all of life's circumstances, even wounded with an arrow in the jungle. I spoke to the Motilons as they encircled me. I come from far. I want to be a friend in the Yukpa language, but they don't speak Yukpa. I spoke to them in Spanish. Quiero ser tu amigo. Vengo desde lejos. Recíbame. They don't understand Spanish. I spoke to them in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Sanskrit. And a rabadoy, and one of the warriors went nonsense. One of the leaders of the commission that ambushed us approached me, took the arrow on my leg and pulled it out, shoved it in my back and forced me to stand. And I would persevere with them 4 more hours to escalate a high hill down into the valley. There was a large community house built along the riverside. A house that was 3 times the size of the sanctuary here. Thatched palm materials from a center beam all the way to the ground with only 4 small openings. So you stoop through the small opening to come into this construction of palm thatched materials. Dark inside, but fires were silhouetting the height, 2 times the height of the sanctuary here. And I could see hundreds of hammocks tied into the rafters of the home. And then the fires silhouetted the women who were frightened and gathering their children and running into the jungles. They had shouted, "Our husbands captured a cannibal." But I didn't speak their language. I didn't know what they were saying. The Motilon people believe that the outside world are cannibals. That's why civilization encroaches on their territory to fight against them. And they have a legend of a magical flute that hums out, "Ooh, karabako, karabako, the meal, the meal." And this magical flute that hums to the mountains and valleys materializes into a DC-3 airplane with the letters Colombian Petroleum Company in red. And they say that's the blood of our deceased relatives. They're taking legends of yesterday to equate it with circumstances and things that is happening now. And I'm the cannibal that can bring the magical flute to destroy them. But they did not kill me because I was sojourning alone. But none of this I didn't understand. So very clumsily, I sat on the floor of this large communal home. The women took the children to the adjacent jungles frightened. 3 days later, they returned. One native, whose name was Rabadoika, came to me and pulled at my shirt, and they pulled it off and they found that I had no coloration. They spoke to me, and I didn't understand what they said, so I tried to mimic. And he gasped. He thought everyone spoke the Motilon language. If you have life, language is life. If you don't speak our language, how can you be alive? What are you? The first night went by, my leg was festering. I was hungry, frightened. Some of the warriors would approach me and jab me with an arrow. When I would jump, a Rabadoika would come to my rescue and say, "Don't tantalize him." I so assumed because they stopped jabbing me with an arrow. The third day, a young fellow came whose name is Bobarishoda, and he brought a bundle, and you opened up these banana leaves, and inside I saw palm grubs about the size of your thumb, or the size of a Frankfurt. I'm hungry. And this child apprehensively took one of the worms and took it to his mouth and went, my invitation to eat. I took one of those things and brought it to my mouth and stared into its eyes, poor thing. Mushy. Big grubworm from a palm tree. I bit its head. Nothing happened. I pulled and it exploded. And I scraped its substance across my face and brought it into my mouth. And I found it reminiscent of bacon and eggs. I could identify the flavor. So I ventured to another palm grub, and this time I didn't bite and pull, but I went just like Rabadoika did and Bobby did, and I was nourishing myself. Then I spotted some bananas. I'd much rather have bananas than grubworms. Another delight are monkey entrails with the natural filling. Use your imagination. Exotic gourmet foods in the jungles, but foods that have kept the Motilon brethren alive for thousands of years in these jungles, the jungles that God entrusted to them to protect, to multiply, and be fruitful. Now the missionaries penetrating into their territory, misunderstood being a cannibal, and they're feeding the enemy of their people. I find the Motilons have 15 varieties of bananas. Some of the bananas are red. We have a blue banana. We have the ladyfinger banana that is as sweet as raw sugar. So I delighted myself in the bananas. My legs started to heal, and the women came back to the community house, and I was listening to the language of the people that have never been heard before by an outsider, and I was trying to mimic what the Motilons were saying, which caused great jubilation among them because I pronounced their language so funny-like. I had learned the word for banana, borokba, and when I'd say borokba, they would share with me this marvelous fruit. In the early morning, I said borokba, and they brought me a stone axe. I said borokba a second time, and they brought me a second stone axe. The third time I pinched my nose together and I said borokba, which raised the tone of my voice, and they brought me bananas. Listen to the difference. Borokba, borokba. One is an axe, the other is a banana. We have a tonal language. When I studied at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Jones says there are no tonal languages in the Americas. Bless his heart. I wish he had been with me. He would be surprised. We do have tonal languages, and Motilon is one of the languages. I'll give you 3 phrases in the Motilon language, changing the tone, and see if you can feel the tonal difference. Shkubaina naihi, shkubaina naihi, shkubaina naihi. The animal went into the hole. It is lost. I know the way of everlasting life. Shkubaina naihi, shkubaina naihi, shkubaina naihi. Hear the tonal difference? You can be lost in a hole, or you can be on the trail of everlasting life. What a challenge this language is. I found 15 words for red in the Motilon language. There's no common root in these words. If I invite you to their territory, this is what the invitation would sound like. We have the New Testament translated in this language. We have 18 textbooks published in this language. Motilon people are evangelizing 18 other linguistic groups with the resurrection gospel of Jesus Christ. God incarnate in human flesh, He shed blood for the forgiveness of our sin, and faith in His resurrection, we can be born anew, as Paul says, have a new creation, a new life. But how do you build from learning how to say the word banana or axe to relate the gospel of Jesus Christ? This is why the missionary is gone. This is what God put in my heart. I was learning the Motilon language. I felt quite comfortable. We were traveling the home of a Chiringdakaira, which is in the high echelons of the Andes Mountains. It was about an 8-day walk, and I heard excruciating shouts echoing through the jungles, agonizing. One of the tribal members had died. Some of the men had dug a hole 3 meters into the ground, shouting into the hole, "God, reveal yourself to us." Other warriors had climbed into the jungle canopy, eating the unfolding leaves of the trees, shouting to the horizon, "God, reveal yourself to us," eating the unfolding leaves to identify with life and the horizon. And as they shouted and looked for God in anguish, no God came out of the hole, nor did God appear from the horizon. I've been living with the Motilons for several years now. I had never seen 2 Motilon, neither women nor men, fight amongst themselves. They don't steal because you can make what you need. I saw no Western sins among them, and I thought, I have found a pristine culture of paradise. What a great place for an anthropologist to live. Motilons say that God lives beyond the horizon, and at one time we lived with God in the horizon, but a spirit came to beguile us and convince us to go to the land of the better hunt, and we left the horizon for that better hunt, and we were beguiled and that spirit disappeared. Ever since then we struggled to come to the horizon. That's where God lives, and we walk through the jungles. The further we walk, the further away the horizon is. Now I'm starting to understand why God placed a missionary among the Motilone brethren. He knows their anguish. He knows their heart. He knows they want reunion with the Creator. Here a chieftain, a warrior had died, and they're calling to God to come back to the community and bring his language back into the tribe. Language is life. A medicine man was telling me a legend how a warrior was incarnate into an ant. And he taught the ants how to live in community. A large community house with trails from north to south, east to west. He taught the ants how to grow leaves upon which funguses could be cultivated, which nourishes the ant colony. How did they learn to do this? It took the intelligence of a Motilone who was incarnate into an ant. I got that word, incarnate. A marvelous word. Now that the Motilones were agonizing the death of a tribal leader, I said, God has become incarnate in Jesus Christ to walk your trail of life's experiences, to bring you to the horizon, the abode of our Creator. Oh, they're understanding what I'm saying. It's the gospel contextualized within the Motilone culture. Oktabidina looked to me. He said, do you know God incarnate in human flesh? I said, I do. He walks our trails. I said, he does. He grabbed my hand and said, take me to God incarnate in our flesh. How would you take someone in the 21st century to meet Christ physically? I backed off and I said, I cannot. You killed Jesus Christ. And they thought he must have been an oil company employee whom they had shot. On an occasion while hunting the wild tapir, it's a huge animal. It looks like a giant pig, but actually it's closely related to hippopotamus from the old continent of Africa. On this occasion, killing the danta or the tapir, two names, the medicine man broke open a wild cane and turns it into a sharp knife. And with his wild cane, he takes the hide off the danta. And in the ritual, he pulls his hide over his head and down his back. And he gets on his hands and knees and he says, I have become a danta. What did Christ do on the cross? Shed his blood to pull it over our deception so we can come before a holy God. And I said, this is how Christ died. Their word for sin is beguilement. Because of your beguilement, you're separated from God. He has mercy on you because of his shed blood to forgive you. But if Christ is dead, what hope is there for us? They have the legend of a banana stalk. Something of God's character will come out of the banana stalk. And Oktabidina, now quite challenged to what I'm saying, cut out a portion of a banana stalk from the plantation and cut that banana stalk open lengthwise, thud. And the leaves inside were severed in half, and they unraveled from the banana stalk like pages from a book. I took my New Testament, I said, here's God's banana stalk. It says Jesus is resurrected from the dead. And the Holy Spirit visited the Motilone community. They understood the gospel. God incarnate in Jesus. He shed blood for the forgiveness of sins. His resurrection that we can believe in him. And Paul says, now you'll become a new creature, a new creation. And Bo Shoda said, I speak a new language. If I speak a new language, because I have a new life. Tremendous. So together as a community, we start growing together spiritually. What is the authority for education in the spiritual world among our communities here in North America? Scripture. The Motilones hear prophecies of winds whispering through the leaves of the trees, the combination of different tones. They can hear prophecies to their future. They shout into the cave and an echo replies back to them and tells them secrets of creation, and the spirits and the river reveal to them creation stories. Should we listen to the gospel and the whispering winds of the trees? Should we shout into the cave to find teachings of Jesus Christ in the 21st century? No. How do you grow in faith? How does the Holy Spirit minister to your heart? Through the Word. So I began translating the New Testament with the Motilon brethren. Now I was very agile in their language. We translated the Gospels. And as we read the translation in the evening, a Motilon would ask a question after each verse to see if the people will come into conversations and understand what the verse is saying. I brought in the idea of tropical agriculture where they did not grow crops before. We're now growing pineapples, we're growing corn, we're growing beans and rice. If you, in the Motilon language, you have a full stomach, you have a happy heart. In Spanish as well. Barriga llena, corazón contento. In Motilon language, ay shabishuk sederi. And they were filling their stomachs. They were nomadic people wandering in the Andes jungles, harvesting what roots could be found and what natural fruits could fall off the trees and what they could hunt with their bow and arrows. This idea of growing crops was phenomenal. And for the first time, they had a surplus of food. And they could grind the corn into patties in the dry season where there's no fish. Or when the change of the wet season, there is no hunt, they would have rice, they could have corn and beans. And they said, our chieftains have filled our stomachs. They're happy with their leaders who have new ideas incorporating agriculture within the values of their own culture. They're prospering and they're eating better. There is an epidemic of conjunctivitis, that's the Pinkeye Disease. And the medicine man was singing an incantation to heal the people's eyes. But the more he sang, the worse their eyes became. So I told the medicine man, here I have terramycin, put this in the people's eyes. No, you're a mergba, you're from the outside, we don't use your magic. Then I put my fingers in the eyes of a sick Motilon and rubbed it into my own eyes. And in 4 days I had conjunctivitis. And the medicine man sang for me a song of healing. I reasoned with the medicine man, since I'm from the outside, you can put terramycin in my eyes and sing for me a new song of healing. And that was logical to him. So he squeezed the tube and got some of the medication in my eyes and sang for me a song of healing, and in 2 days cured my eyes. He knew it was that new song, so he took the new song to everybody else in the community, but no one's eyes improved. And one late evening, he asked me, do you have more tubes of terramycin? I do. And he squeezed it in everybody's eyes and cured all their eyes at the same time. He is a successful healer. He's leading his people. He's dedicated to help his people. But so often missionaries will come into a competition against the structure of society. Will fight against the medicine man because he sings incantations. But the absence of the medicine man is not the presence of Jesus. Other mission organizations say that you live in a large community home 3 times the size of the sanctuary. Why, promiscuous sex, that can't be permitted. If you have promiscuous sex in a community, it will dissolve itself. For some reason, we come with North American ideas that must be imposed on the Indians, a preamble to becoming Christian. But here's a group of Motilons who confess faith in Jesus Christ. And the tribal leader says, we walk in his footsteps towards the horizon. The Motilons fight bitterly with the Yukpas. They were my guides when I first went into their territory. And God is constraining a Rabadoika to witness the gospel of the resurrection of Christ to the Yukpas. I became my own father. I said to him, it could be dangerous. Just as my father exhorted me not to go to Colombia, it is dangerous. And here I'm saying that the same thing to a Rabadoika. He's going to go to the Yukpas to share the gospel, even though they don't speak the same language. He left his bows and arrows behind and walked 3 days up into the higher plateaus of the Andes Mountains. And the Yukpa chieftain, whose language I do speak because I lived with him for 2 years, said, when the Motilons were approaching, we loaded our bow and arrows, and I shouted, shoot! And our arrows just fell to the ground. No strength. And the Rabadoika approached Manastauri, put his hands on the shoulders of Manastauri, and said, Christ gives life to the dead, dry bones of your deceased relatives. You see, when the Yukpa dies in the Andes Mountains, The body is buried in the earth and the bones are recovered 1 year later. Then these bones are tied into a sack and placed inside a huge cave by an elder daughter of the community. And in a ritual, the elder daughter shouts into the cave, "God, give life to the dead, dry bones of our relatives." They expect a resurrection. These are Yukpas. And they're intent to see if the dead will walk down the mountainside. But no one comes down the mountainside. And the Rabadoikis says the blood of Christ will give life to the dead. But the Motilons don't speak Yukpa. The Yukpa don't understand the Motilons. When I hear the story of the Yukpas then turning their faith to Christ, their word for faith is to walk on solid ground. There's much quicksand in the Yukpa territory. If you walk on quicksand, you sink. So their word for faith, solid ground. The Motilon's word for faith is to tie your hammock strings up into 6 meters into the rafter of the community house. You can't have one foot on the ground and the other foot in the hammock. You're suspended totally. 2 different cultures, 2 different tribal people, speaking different languages, yet the Spirit of Christ bears witness to Hara Manastauri. Later, I visit Manastauri, and he says, "We believe in Jesus." There are Motilon University graduates translating the New Testament into the Yukpa language. If we can produce a doctor among the Motilons, can't they produce a translator? If the Motilons have dentists, nurses, forest rangers, and they're all in the jungles among their people, serving their people, indeed they can take the utensils and work with Koine Greek and render the New Testament in the tribal language of the Yukpas. And this is what they are doing. We started out evangelization in 1 tribe. Now we're in 28 different languages. 2 months ago, we brought together over 100 languages and dialects in the Colombian plains. And they call their movement the Dudu movement, to walk in his footsteps. The same Dudura that Rabadoika says to the president of Colombia when he asks, "What has changed your people? Is it the missionary?" "No, we had to teach them to speak our language and eat our food." "Well, is it the science of education, preventative medical procedures?" "No, these are tools that enhance our life." What has changed your people? We walk in the footsteps of a new leader. Who is this new leader? Jesus Christ. This is in the 21st century. Colombia is a sophisticated country. Bogota has more than 28 universities in the capital city of 10 million. A sophisticated country, but at war with itself through the guerrilla movements. Now in dialogue in Cuba, finalizing the pacting peace, so they say. So the Motilons are prospering. The gospel is going into new tribal areas. We organize a cooperative so the Indians can produce a profit to underwrite their schools in the jungles and their health centers. The profit of the cooperative, by selling chocolate grown by the Motilons themselves, enables them also to underwrite scholarships for students who will leave the jungles, go to the city to prepare in the academics, and return to serve the people. Over 400 students have studied outside of the jungles, and all are back in the jungles among their people because they met Jesus in their jungles, and he has commissioned them to be this pioneering idea of incorporating benefits of the Western world with the traditions. One of the first Motilons that would leave the jungles was quite comical. Is a Roberto Daxarara. He came with Fidel Waisesirit, the first 2 who would study high school. They had preparations in the cities in grade school, where we have books in their language now. And they're enthused, they're commissioned to represent their people to the outside world. And for the first time, Daxarara would squeeze his toes together into a pair of tennis shoes. Their toes are open like this so they can escalate the mountainside with great agility, or when they run across country in competition, you need your toes to grab the earth as you run. Well, he squeezes them together to stuff them into tennis shoes. He pulls breeches over his loincloth, puts on a plaid shirt just like all Colombians. And when he sees the city, he sees cars, He thinks they're animals, but when he hits the side of the car, it's hard, it's metallic. He didn't know what that was. He had never seen a mirror before in his life, but he could count 1, 2, 3. That's all the numbers that they have. And now he's going to go to high school. He was intimidated, yet he had a spark in his heart that there was something for him to do. I found a school that I could register our 2 new students in. In the first year, his academics was very poor. He had to learn the Spanish numbering system. Now he could count to 1,000 in Spanish. He had to learn the history of Colombia. They talk about the Christopher Columbus Day when America was discovered, and he scratches his head. He said, "We were never lost." Christopher Columbus tries to find us. The second year, his academics improves. The third year, he's an academic achiever. The fourth year, he's on the list of the rector's great students. We have 6 years of high school in Colombia, and in the 6th year, every student has to write a term paper in English. It's a simple paper. And this is what Daxarara wrote. Colombians call us motilones. That means short hair. They burn their hair off their head, literally. And they look like beetle haircuts. Colombians call us motilones. That means short hair. We call ourselves bari, the people. If you live in the jungles, we walk in the footsteps of our chieftain, and he brings us food, the hunt. He brings us out to fish, and our stomachs are full. If you live in the city and walk on a sidewalk, there's no food. There's no full stomach. In the jungles, we have leaders who have brought us new seeds, no agricultural techniques, no animal husbandry techniques. In the city, there are politicians who make promises, but no one understands what they're offering. In the jungles, our stomachs are full. In the city, people are hungry. Where is it most logical to live? He closed his term paper. The director of the high school calls Daxarara forward in a general assembly and says to him, to his face, with the whole student body present, if you don't have money, if you don't build monuments, what's the value of life? Daxarara said the character of each individual is the value of life. What wisdom from a high school student, whom we call savage. Savage are we. Because they don't look like us, they can't learn like us. Because they don't look like us, they can't implement benefits of the science to overcome the shortcomings that they have in the jungles. So Roberto Daxarara graduates eventually law with 2 PhDs. Well, my spirit is tickled because when I go to Bogota, I'm always invited to speak to Congress. They say I'm a hero because I lived among the savage Indians, speak their languages, and I came out of the jungles alive. Other sojourners aren't so fortunate. And they always invite me to speak to Congress and share the episodes, what is happening there to some of the subcommissions. And I would. And when I finish what I have to say, I want to litigate the cause of the Indians to have a reservation. It's too late. We can't discuss anything any longer. Adjourned. I've done this 3 times with the same product. Null. The 4th time invited to speak, I take Roberto Daxarara with me. And I said, I have laryngitis, but Daxarara can speak. I have laryngitis, but Daxarara can speak. Oh, he's an Indian. Yes, with 2 PhDs in law. How did he get that in the jungle? No, he went to St. Thomas University. He graduated magna cum laude. And he tells Congress, when I was young, my parents would ambush the oil company employees, and they would scurvy and run away from our onslaught. And running so fast, their safety helmets would fall on the ground, and the children had to gather up those safety helmets and the machetes that they threw away so they could run with greater velocity. These are our trophies of war, but in those metal safety helmets, the aluminium, you say here in English, the aluminum safety helmets, they cook the wild turkey eggs. That's what I did as a a warrior, a son of a warrior. Then I grew and I learned to write my name. Daksarara. Then I learned to read phrases. Daksarara kiabaitakaina. Then I learned to read books. And then I learned Spanish through our language. A textbook to teach us Spanish. Then I go to high school in Bucaramanga. Then I go to St. Thomas University and study law. Now I come before you as a representative of the Motilon people to litigate the cause of a land reservation for my people. The lands that God entrusted to my people should be protected by law. How embarrassing for Congress as they look down at their feet. And they, Daksarara, litigated a reservation for his people of ample territory. The lands entrusted to them by God are also protected by Colombian law. This is phenomenal. It has never happened in the indigenous world in South America before. It's not happened in Africa. We convinced the African to leave your round homes, which is indicative of the beginning and end, the perfection of God, and we teach the African to live in square buildings. Then we bring them organs so they can play music from the Western world. And these are preambles to becoming Christian. If they don't have the preamble, they'll never understand Christ. Brethren, the Holy Spirit lives and exists. He can live in our hearts. We have to be more conscientious to the people among whom we live and present the gospel so it's understandable. Christ, who was so tempted and tried as each motilon, that he has overcome these temptations. One anthropologist commented, Olson, you comment that you never saw social violence among the motilons. What's their need for redemption? They live in a pristine society, happy. Why bring them the misery that we have within the Christian church in North America? Well, once you live with the motilons and you laugh with them and cry with them, you observe what they're suffering. First of all, orphans are abandoned in the jungles to the prey of the jaguar. Bobby says, now that we receive Jesus into our life, he adopts us in the family of God. We must adopt our orphans back into community. Is this not a Christian virtue? That's a transformation of a community. Has nothing to do with a square building or Western music. Secondly, the motilons who never shared their foodstuffs, they live in a community house, but food is not community. What is my hunt is for me and my family. If there's a family that has no food, the omens were against them. They'll suffer hunger. Through Christ's compassion, we should share our foodstuffs. And they do. And the humble family receives the foodstuffs, grateful for the sharing. Isn't that a Christian virtue? Isn't that aligning with God? Thirdly, what I observed, the elderly are abandoned in the jungles. I should have died 20 years ago. They abandon the elderly in the jungles because they can't keep abreast with a tribal nomad as they migrate the mountains and the jungle lowlands. Now they care for their elderly. Isn't that a transformation of the presence of Christ in the community? So the gospel goes to the Yukpas. The gospel matures among the motilons. They take social responsibility. They have organized schools in their jungles where they read and write their language. They have learned creative writing so they can write histories of themselves and present this to Colombia to claim their place in South American history. Revolution is born in Colombia. The FARC has been there for 50 years. I knew the founders of the FARC, the revolutionary organization that has dialogued with the government in Cuba. The ELN, which was founded by an ex-Roman Catholic priest, I knew him as well. He would work among the poor people in Barranquilla, and I continued among the Motilon brethren in the high Andes mountains. But the guerrillas said, Olson is not sympathetic to our movement. The Indians will not embrace our cause. We will abduct him. We have more than 48 cooperatives. I was coming into the third cooperative to pick up some materials to take to Kuroda when 16 combating guerrillas materialized on the riverbank, and with a machine gun hitting the sand on the beach, it looked like the beach was literally boiling as a cauldron of water. I was captured by the guerrillas. The muzzle of one of their, rifles or whatever it was jabbed into my mouth. I thought they were going to pull the trigger. They didn't. I fell down. They bound my hands behind my back, and they would take me into the interior jungles, to the headwaters of a river system, and I would be shackled to a palm tree for several months in the outside elements. I was having complications of diverticulitis, which is internal hemorrhaging, very painful. I had fevers. I thought it was time to die. And I was all right with that. Kind of hallucinating, you might say, I looked into the canopy, the jungle canopy, and I saw a motilon suspended in space. So I whistled to him in the tonal quality, "You can encamp around the guerrillas, shoot them up with bows and arrows, and I can escape." And the motilon whistled back to me, "No, I've come here to stop your internal hemorrhaging. I've come to give you warmth. And tomorrow you're going to be unshackled from the palm tree, but you'll remain among our adversaries." And he disappeared. Immediately internal hemorrhaging stopped. I felt warmth in my body. And the following day, the combating violent personnel unshackled me from the palm tree and said, "You will be brought into our main campsite." Hallucinating. Imaginations. I don't know. I had become more ill as time stretched on. And I didn't think I'd leave the jungles alive, which is all right. That was my place of service. But I was determined by one of the commandants that I should have a transfusion of blood. Camilo would be hooked up from his arm to mine. We have the same blood type. A living transfusion. I had an allergy to his serum, not his blood type, and my body swelled. I couldn't bend my arm. I was miserable with diverticulitis, complications of that, and then that transfusion. At nighttime, as the moon came over the horizon, a mirla bird flew into the limb of the tree where my hammock was tied into. And he was singing in motilon tonal qualities that I walk in the steps of Jesus to come to the horizon. No evil can claim our bodies from the protection of God. In the morning, the sun comes up. When you sleep in a hammock, you just fold the sides of the hammock over your body. You look like you're in a tube. Look like a nice Frankfurt in a bun. Camilo, who gave me his blood, opened up the hammock and looked into my eyes. And he said, "Olson, do you know who I am?" I said, "Yes, you're the valiant Camilo." He said, "When I was 3 years old, my father committed suicide. And the Motilon Cooperative from Sapagdana sent food to my mother for 1 year, not charging a cent. You saved my life and my brothers and my mother. Now I saved your life with my blood. You have guerrilla blood circulating through your veins." What a bonding. The commandant wanted me to give courses of different types of government, socialism as opposed to capitalism, and materialism as opposed to dialectical materialism, which are university courses. And then they allowed me to speak of the gospel. Well, they couldn't even read and write, the combating guerrillas, so I taught them how to read and write in Spanish. And communist literature is so difficult, they couldn't put together consonants and vowels long enough for those complicated words. And so I had the New Testament. And I asked the commandant, can we read from the book of Matthew in the New Testament? And here Camilo reads, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Tears were coming into the eyes of combating guerrillas because daily they're confronted with dangers. They can be bombed out when they go on their attacks against the armed forces commissioned. They can be killed. They know how close it is to die. And Christ's words blessed them. And I saw more than 50 combating guerrillas accept Christ into their life, to know as the Motilones, to be resurrected in Jesus Christ and to have a new life. So we have North Americans confessing faith in Jesus Christ. In a local congregation where we sit in pews or sit in chairs, play organs, and God meets our heart. We have Motilones in the jungles who say we walk in the footsteps of Jesus Christ to bring us to the horizon. His death and resurrection has brought us to be born in the family of God. And we have the guerrillas who say we fight for social justice, we'll kill our enemies. And then their hearts are broken because of the words of Jesus. Blessed are the poor and meek. I was transferred to another campsite, and it was said by the commandant that I'd become subversive among them, bringing peace, pacification. My idea was not to stop the guerrillas from shooting armed forces. It was to bring them the truth of the gospel of Christ. My idea was not to pacify the Motilones so they stopped shooting intruders into their territories. It was to bring them the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm brought to another campsite, and since I will not join forces with the guerrillas, I should be executed. And it was published in the Colombian papers that Bruce Olsen, friend of the Motilones, was executed because he would not comply with the demands of the revolution. Brethren, I had seen people shackled to a tree, rifles lifted, the command to shoot, and blood spattering across the green leaves of the jungles, and the crippled falling bodies of the victim of our violence for human justice. Now it's your turn. So I'm tied again to a tree. The rifles are loaded. The countdown begins. 3, 2, 1, fire. And I hear the deafening sounds of explosions from the muskets, from the rifles. But I feel no pain. I was shot at with blanks. I'm alive. A week later, I was released from my abduction after a year. I traveled through the jungles to come to Headwaters of Kibo and came into the Council of Chieftains in Hiki, Kuroda. There they were united together. They knew that Olson had been released. And I sat with the Council of Chieftains, and they said, "We sent the angel to find you, to stop your internal hemorrhaging, to give you warmth and give you encouragement." Brethren, when I translated the New Testament, I didn't know what angels were. I know the angels from Renaissance art. I know angels carved in the cathedrals of our beautiful churches. But I knew of no angels who minister. But the Motilones understand this. They're wiser, more spiritual, more sensitive than I am. The papers resounded that Olson was released from abduction. The president of Colombia invited me to come to Bogota with several Motilone leaders. And in Bogota, he was explaining to the Motilone brethren that we fight against the guerrillas because they're our enemies. We kill our enemies. And the Rabadoy looks into the eyes of Vigilio Barco and he asks, if you have a child erring with bad discipline, do you kill him? The president says, of course not. I reconcile them back into the family. That's what we must do among the erring Colombians, reconciling them back into the community. This resounds in the Colombian papers. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ in the 21st century. It's not looking at Indians as savage and primitive and cannibals, no. It's looking at people that God created, placed in the jungles, and trusted to them their territories. We're to respect this. Now we're translating the gospel into many different languages, 18 at the present time. Now we have Motilones who have graduated from universities, thankful that they have new instruments by which to fight disease in the jungles, to vaccinate against epidemic diseases. They're oppressed with the 21st century, and the Organization of American States said they are an example of community development. And Arabadoica says to the president, we must walk in the footsteps of a new leader. Who is this new leader? Jesus Christ. It's 8:30. Thank you very much to be able to share some of this with you. As you pray for the mission endeavor, this is dear to the heart of God. Christ commissioned us to go to all peoples on planet Earth. He didn't commission us to become wealthy or to be great administrators. He said, share my gospel. Of course, people must stay by the stuff. There must be provisions to fling the missionary to these new countries and cultures. There must be a prayer warrior congregation that upholds your missionaries in prayer. But our message is Christ and Him resurrected. God bless you. Thank you.